Listen, I'm probably not the last person you expected to come out and talk about Quinton Johnston in a positive fashion, but I'm definitely not the first. I had a lot of conversations with Alex coming through that draft a couple of years ago with Quinton Johnston leaving TCU after making a run to the national championship with TCU and looking really good doing it in his third season with 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns for the second consecutive season. Quinton Johnston was an alluring prospect, very athletic, not quite as athletic as they once tried to tell us he would be. Had drop problems, as we've discussed on the channel at Roster Watch numerous times. Quinton Johnston, though, for 2025 fantasy football is interesting because I think there's a couple of things that pose positivity, pose value for us. He's currently going off the board at wide receiver 69. Again, we're in late July right now. Wide receiver 69. Across all sites, he's currently 146th on Underdog, which I guess has been the most drafted site to date this summer. 191 on CBS, 282 on ESPN, 178 on FFPC, 163 on Yahoo, and he comes out right around that 188 mark, which is right in the mid 16th round. Mid 16th round for Quinton Johnston. So you're talking about the last couple of picks. As far as ADP goes, he's going off the board after kickers. If your league has kickers, that's Jake Bates. That's Brendan Aubrey from Dallas. Kickers. How about quarterbacks? I love Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh, but not more than some people that can help me on a weekly basis, potentially. Aaron Rodgers is going off at 183. Anthony Richardson's going off at 185. However you think about Anthony Richardson, I don't know if the Colts are really going to get anything out of Richardson this year or not. I don't really believe so. Quinton Johnston, though, wide receiver in Los Angeles with no Mike Williams now that he's retired. They have not, at time of recording, signed to Keenan Allen. It's Ladd McConkey. They love Aronde Gadsden. Yes. Trey Harris is a dog. Yes. 5.15 yards per out run in 2024 playing for the Ole Miss Rebels. Lane Kiffin's offense works a little bit different. If you turn on the tape for the Ole Miss Rebels, it works different than most offenses. It doesn't translate directly. He spent 2 years at Ole Miss before he transferred over from Louisiana Tech. He had 900 some yards this last year at Ole Miss, 8 touchdowns, got injured, didn't play a full season. If we would have played a full season, he would have had 1,500 yards, might have led the country in receiving yards. Trey Harris is good. Think he can pick up the playbook and be a contributor. They've said Trey Harris is going to be the X. Johnston will play the opposite side. Johnston's had a good camp so far after a couple days. In year 3, it would not shock me in the slightest if Quinton Johnston took over. He had 700 yards last year. Remember, he wasn't a zero. Everybody wants to spin the narrative that he was a zero. Quinton Johnston was far from a zero in 2024. Like I remember, let me remind you quick. He was the 21st overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. He had 487 yards and 2 touchdowns his freshman year at TCU, 634 and 6 touchdowns his sophomore year, and 1,069 yards and 6 touchdowns his junior year, his final year at TCU. Now, in the NFL, similar thing. 431 yards and 2 touchdowns as a rookie, 711 and 8 touchdowns as a second-year player last year, and now in the third season, which we did hear so much drumbeat, which was kind of annoying last year. So much drumbeat from Greg Roman and from Jim Harbaugh about Quinton Johnston and their belief in Quinton Johnston. I was like, man, I don't want to believe this stuff, but we saw it. We saw them target Quinton Johnston. Maybe not a ton, but you remember back in week 9, 4 catches, 118 yards and a touchdown. He's targeted 35 yards downfield. He's targeted right at the line of scrimmage, breaks a tackle and takes that ball 30, 40 yards downfield. Out routes, fly routes, comebacks. He's working across the formations. How about week 2? Yeah, last year, 5 catches, 51 yards, 2 touchdowns. He can score. I was looking through next gen stats the other day, and I wanted to save this data point here. I thought a couple of these things were interesting. Quinton Johnston, 23.7% of his team's share of his team's air yards in 2024. Yeah, it's not great. No, Calvin Ridley, Cortland Sutton, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Tyreek Hill at the top at 40%, 44% in this category. But Quinton Johnston wasn't the ball hog. That was Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey in this stat, 26%. You could scroll on down a little bit, 23.7% for Quinton Johnston. We talked about the 700 yards, the 8 touchdowns. 8 touchdowns. It's not the most predictable stat, I understand. But then I looked at Yak. How much does Quinton Johnston create after the catch? Number one amongst receivers was Debo Samuel, 8.4. Khalil Shakir, 8.2. Jamison Williams, Jaden Reed. Those typical names. Chris Godwin's in there. Of course, Xavier Worthy. Over 7 yards per reception in Yak. But you don't have to scroll down very far to get to a grip of studs. A grip of studs from the fantasy football conversation. Devontae Adams, 5.8 yards after catch per reception. Nico Collins, 5.6 yards after catch per reception. Quinton Johnston, 5.6 yards after catch per reception. CeeDee Lamb, 5.6 yards after catch per reception. Brock Bowers, A.J. Brown, 5.4. Ladd McConkey, 5.1. He's creating with the ball in his hands. Another thing that is just a positive in the Quinton Johnston, back pocket is separation. He's been good as a separator over the course of the last year. The best separator at the wide receiver position last year, 4.3 yards per route run, average separation. 4.3 was Khalil Shakir, Demario Douglas, Jaden Reed, Lamade Zaccheaus, Zay Flowers, 3.9, 4, Xavier Worthy, 3.8. But you don't have to go very far down to get to a good grip of talent. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 3.3. Garrett Wilson, 3.3. Cooper Kupp, 3.3. Devontae Adams, 3.2. Remember that name from before? Chris Godwin, 3.2. Quinton Johnston, 3.2. Tyreek Hill, 3.2. Ladd and Debo, 3.1. The data stands behind the growth that we've seen on clips on Twitter from camp. We're going to continue to see over the course of the next 3 weeks it grow. If they go out and pay Keenan Allen, if they go out and get another weapon, yes, we can take that as, an adjustment. But for the time being, the value of Quinton Johnston in the 16th round is not something you can surpass, and it will be accounted for on the Ultimate Draft cheat sheet over at RosterWatch.com. Click that QR code over there on the right. Go over to RosterWatch.com, tap in, lock in. Quinton Johnston, man. I'm going to be fighting a battle with Alex, probably for the whole of fall. But I got Trash Man on my side, so I like my chances. We'll see you tomorrow for another one.
This is Anthony Richardson. You're listening to Roster Watch.
This is A.J. Brown, and you're listening to Roster Watch.
This is Josh Allen, and you're listening to Roster Watch.